cared for my sick parent, every day while balancing my career, only to find out that they had been secretly planning to sell our family home and move without telling me, forcing me to choose between loyalty and protecting myself from emotional ruin. I was 23 when it finally all started to unravel, but really the threads had been unraveling for years before I even noticed. My name is Lucas, and I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. That kind of town where everyone knows your name, and if they don't, then they know your dad or your uncle or at least someone who you're related to. My mother is 54, and my dad is 57. I'm the only child, no sibling, and to be honest with you, most of my life I felt special because I was the whole center of their world. But now that I'm older, it's just a burden attached to my back that I never had a say about. When I graduated from college in Boston, I thought I could finally build something of my own, a life as a graphic designer, maybe even branch out to the city, meet some new faces, have a life not centered around the same 3 streets that I had been walking since I was 5. But then my mom got sick. Not some cataclysmic abrupt thing, not cancer or a car accident, but in the sluggish, grinding way that transforms every detail of your everyday before you know how deeply you're in, until you wake up one morning and realize you don't know when you last had an entire night of sleep. She was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease when I was in college, but she just kept it to herself, brushed it off. Just fatigue, just stress, and my dad, well, he's one of those types of men who blinks hard at things until they whack him over the head. By the time I graduated, she could barely walk a block without pain. I remember the first week I was home, I went shopping for her at the grocery store, and when I got back, she was sitting on the couch staring at the floor with tears running down her face, for she'd spilled a mug of coffee and couldn't bend to clean it. Something within me broke that day. I promised myself I'd only remain a little, just until she stabilized, maybe a few months, then I'd be back to the search for jobs in the city. But 2 months passed, then 2 years. Each morning I woke at 6, made her tea, helped her with medications, and got on my laptop and did freelance work. Logo work for California startup companies, consulting slides professionally edited for consultants in Chicago, odd jobs that just paid enough to keep me going. It wasn't the work I had pictured, but it was flexible, and flexibility was the only way I could be there for her. My dad continued to work full-time at the mill, 12-hour work weeks a majority of weeks, so most of the day-to-day care fell to me. And I didn't resent it, at least not to begin with. She is my mother. She gave up so much for me. The least I could do was be there for her when she asked. But at some point, it ceased being a decision and began feeling like I'd been drafted into a war I never signed up for. College friends were moving to new cities, getting promoted at their jobs, going to weddings. I was buying adult diapers at Walgreens and trying not to cry when I realized that I couldn't even afford to pay for my own car. The house became the focal point of my world. Our family home, a small 2-story with peeling blue paint and a tilted porch, had been the heart of my childhood. Every scratch on the kitchen table was a story, every photo on the wall a memory. I never once questioned that one day it would be mine to look after. Not financially, I just assumed that it would always be there. The house that we returned to for our holidays. The house where my children would one day meet their grandparents. It was not a house, it was our heritage. So when I stumbled upon the truth, it felt like the ground had opened up underneath my feet. It was the afternoon of a Thursday late summer, the kind of day where the heat was clammy in the air and you needed to breathe with sweat. I'd been digging through some papers in my dad's desk, looking for an insurance form we needed for Mom's treatment, when I found a folder labeled Realtor. I figured it was spam mail at first, but they had emails, printouts, even a draft contract. My parents were selling the house, not in a few years, not someday, but soon. The words blurring on the page as I struggled to understand them. They'd already had it appraised. They'd already talked to an agent. The plan was to sell the house and move to Florida, to one of those villages for retirees where supposedly my mom's healthcare would be easier and my dad could once and for all live stress-free. I sat there stunned, trembling, wondering how they managed to hide this from me. I was the one putting my life on hold. I was the one who woke up each night when Mom cried out in agony, and they didn't even tell me? I don't know how long I just sat there before I heard my dad's boots on the porch. He walked in and noticed the papers on the desk, and his face went white. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," he said, like it wasn't anything, like I'd ruined his timing. My chest burned with this mix of anger and incredulity. "But, you were going to just spring this on me after I gave up everything for it?" My voice cracked, I couldn't help it. He moaned, massaged his forehead and muttered, "We didn't want to burden you." Burden me? I wanted to weep. I was already drowning under burdens, but my mother limped into the room just then, her face scrunched up but her eyes kind, and she puffed softly. "Lucas, sweetie, we thought this best. You need your own life." I should have felt relief at hearing those words, maybe even grateful, but all I could feel was betrayal, because my own life had already been usurped, and now the only thing that was keeping me back was going to be stripped away. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my room with my eyes on the ceiling fan slowly spinning overhead, replaying each concession that I had made, each moment that I felt that we were doing this as a unit. And now I was being left to make an impossible choice. Stay loyal, go with them to Florida, remain the obedient son who puts everyone ahead of himself, or finally put myself first, and possibly disown the people I'd been putting everything in my life for. Neither choice was viable, but I knew sooner or later I'd have to make that decision. The next morning, I woke up with this heavy pit in my belly, as though someone had injected me with cement during the night, and no amount of coffee was ever going to shake it out. Mom was already sitting at the kitchen table, eating slowly a spoonful of oatmeal, her hands trembling as they did now, and Dad was reading halfway through his newspaper, as though everything was fine. I sat down before them, but could not bring myself to swallow a mouthful. My thoughts kept cycling round and round that folder in the drawer of Dad. I finally just blurted it out. "So, when were you going to tell me you're selling the house?" The silence that swept over us was suffocating. Mom clinked her spoon on the bowl, her face hardening, and Dad folded his paper so neatly, like he was short of time. "Lucas," he started, his voice lifeless. "We didn't know how to handle it. We thought perhaps after things leveled a bit." Leveled? Nothing in our life had leveled for years. Every day was a fire I was putting out before it spread to the rest of the house. "You were just going to leave?" I spat. "Just up and move to Florida like this house didn't mean anything?" His jaw clenched, and he replied, "It's just a house, son." And that cut me deeper than anything. Just a house? It was where Mom taught me how to ride a bike in the driveway, where my dad and I painted my room green when I was 10 because I had demanded that green was good luck, where each Thanksgiving we crowded too many chairs into the dining room table and laughed until we were crying. It wasn't a house, it was everything, and hearing him dismiss it like that hurt. Mom grasped my hand, her once plump skin now thin and papery, and spoke softly. "Lucas, we are also considering your future. You can't be tied to this house for the remainder of your life. We didn't mention it because we didn't want you to feel trapped." I yanked my hand away before I realized what I had done, and her eyes filled with tears. I hated myself for doing that, but I was overwhelmed with rage and sadness. I wasn't thinking about work that day. My laptop screen was covered with design sketches, but shapes and colors blended together into nothing. I couldn't help but wonder what my friends in Boston were up to, how they were probably out having drinks after work, complaining about bosses and deadlines. And here I was sitting here wondering if my entire life was coming crashing down around me. I texted my friend Eli, the only one I still kept in touch with regularly. He's 25 now, lives in Chicago, doing well in finance. I typed in, "What would you do if your parents sold your childhood home without telling you?" He replied, "That's cold. Honestly, I'd walk away. You can't let them do that to you." It wasn't easy. Walking away did not mean leaving a house behind. It meant leaving my mom at the time she needed me the most. And as selfish as I had wished to be, as selfish as I had wanted to take a bag and leave, the thought of her on her own made my stomach twist into knots. A couple of days went by, and I tried to speak with Dad again in a calmer discussion. We sat in the garage, him fiddling with tools he hardly used anymore, me sitting against the workbench. "Why Florida?" I said, trying to keep my voice firm. He did not raise his head. "The weather will cure your mom. The physicians in that facility have experience with her kind, and I am tired, Lucas. I have toiled in the mill for 30 years, and I want to retire in the warm weather." He looked at me then, and I saw, for the first time, fatigue etched on each feature of his face. He wasn't just my dad, the rock-like provider. He was a weary, scared, maybe desperate man. Part of me went soft, but part of me flamed up once more. "You could have told me. I had a right to know." He winced. "We didn't want to fight. We knew you'd be angry." That hurt, because it was the truth. I would have battled them tooth and nail, but perhaps that's what families are meant to do, go through difficult things together. They opted for secrecy instead. The next week was agony. Each dinner was strained, as if we were all pretending to be a family as an earthquake brewed beneath our feet. I caught myself staying away from home, taking a walk around the park just to breathe. It was there that I ran into our previous neighbor, Mrs. Edwards, who recognizes me because she has known me since I was a kid. She asked about Mom, and if I replied fine, and said she'd heard the home was going to be listed for sale. My stomach dropped through the floor. If the neighbors knew, how long had I been oblivious? I marched home in a rage, marched to the kitchen, and threw my keys on the counter. "Even the neighbors know!" I shouted. Mom sobbed. Dad muttered something about how people would always gossip, but it was too late. I was the last one to have known anything about my life. That night, I called Eli again. I don't know what to do, I admitted. My voice cracked. If I stay with them, I lose my career. If I stay, I lose them. Either way, I lose. He took a breath, then went on. Sometimes taking care of yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you sane. I'm lying there in bed thinking about that, staring at the glow of my phone on the bedside table, wishing someone would just tell me what the right thing to do was. But life does not give you answers on a platter. It simply drops you in the deep end and allows you to thrash around. A couple of days after this, Mom asked me to drive her to her doctor's appointment. On the way back, she sat staring out the window and whispered quietly, "Lucas, I know you feel betrayed, undefined, but I can't ask you to give up your whole life. You deserve happiness." I clutched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Undefined. Then why didn't you tell me earlier? Undefined, I whispered, my voice no louder than a scratch in the quiet night air. Set time out. She didn't respond. Empty. She simply wiped her eyes and continued to stare out at the trees blurring by, empty, and that silence spoke volumes. The decision hung over me like a storm cloud, and every morning I rose with the burden of it before my feet had time to hit the floor. I'd go ahead and prepare Mom's tea, fill the small plastic cup with her medications, take her blood pressure, smile as if everything was okay, but I was shattering inside. I started keeping a notebook by my bed, scribbling down thoughts at 2 a.m, desperate to make sense of the mess in my head. Things like, do I stay out of duty? Or, if I leave, am I a bad son? Sometimes I'd write, it's just a house, trying to convince myself of what Dad had said, and then write on another page, no, it's not just a house, it's my life. I felt as though they'd taken something away from me, not just the option, but the right to get ready, to grieve. Because if only I'd known, then maybe I could have prepared myself for it, but no, it was like having the rug pulled from my feet. Work suffered. Deadlines were missed. A client was lost. My bank account was bleeding, and I didn't have the energy to go out looking for new work. 23, and I should have been building something, not sinking in quicksand. And yet, as I looked at my mom's pale, exhausted face, yet still managing to force a small smile when I handed her soup, I felt tethered. How do you abandon someone who needs you? How do you put yourself first when it feels like a betrayal? Dad came into my room one night, sat down on the bed, and spoke in an almost whisper. Lucas, I know you're angry, but that's not hurting you. We thought we were making the right decision. Your mom needs more attention. I need to rest, and you need freedom, whether you realize it or not. I gave him a cold stare, my fists hidden under the blanket. Freedom? I repeated. You're removing the one place where I feel like I belong, and you call that freedom? He scrunched up his face in a look of exhaustion. Son, family is not about walls and wood. It's about people. No matter where we are, we'll always be your family. But I didn't believe he really meant it, because it didn't sound like family. It sounded like abandoning me under the guise of good sense. I didn't tell him that, though. I just nodded, because I was too tired to fight. After he left, I buried my face in the pillow and wept like I hadn't in years as a child. The next weekend, I went driving out to the old high school football stadium. No one was there, nothing but the empty seats and the ring of my own footsteps on the gravel. I sat on the 50-yard line and thought about all the various versions of me that had run across this field, the teenage boy with visions of flight, the lad who thought his parents were immovable, the man who left for Boston believing he'd never be back. And here I was again, stuck, hung between obligation and survival. I took out my phone and almost called Eli, but I didn't. Because deep within, I knew he too couldn't give me the answer. No one could. Things got worse when I overheard my parents talking about something one day. I was heading down the corridor to fetch water when I caught their voices in the living room. Dad said, "We can close by October if the buyer is serious." My gut dropped. October? That was just a month from now. Mom's voice was shaking. "What about Lucas? He's not ready." Dad sighed. "He'll have to be. He's grown. He'll adjust." I backed off quietly, my chest tightening, my eyes misting. They'd already set a time limit, and I was still fumbling in the dark. That night, I couldn't breathe. I spent the evening wide awake, my heart pounding like I'd just done a marathon, and I hadn't moved an inch. The following morning, I confronted them. "October?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Mom blinked with surprise. Dad grimaced. "You were listening?" he asked. "How could I not?" I shot back. "Do you even care what this does to me?" The room was silent. Then Mom whispered gently, "Of course we care, but we have to think about surviving, Lucas." Surviving. The term lodged in my chest. Was I not part of surviving? Or was I just an oversight in their plan? I stomped out before they could answer. I drove all day, nowhere in particular, just the highway stretching out ahead of me while my brain tangled like barbed wire. I pulled into a gas station somewhere beyond Albany, parked the car, turned off the engine, and stared into the window at my face. My eyes were hollowed out, and my face was older than 23. I talked to myself in a quiet voice. What are you doing? Who are you doing this for? That night, I phoned my Aunt Mary Ann, my mom's younger sister. She's 50, in Pennsylvania we don't talk often, but I was so desperate for anyone outside the house. When I told her what was going on, she didn't say anything for so long, then whispered, Lucas, your parents love you. But love doesn't necessarily equal them doing what's best for you. Sometimes you have to figure that out yourself. Her words stabbed me. I had been waiting for someone to authorize me to choose me, but maybe no one ever would. Maybe I would have to do it myself, but even as I thought that, guilt came flooding in. How could I abandon a sick mother? How could I be proud of myself if I chose freedom over commitment? The next day, Mom asked me to sit with her on the porch. The air was crisp, autumn setting in. She grasped my hand and spoke. Lucas, I know that you are angry, but I don't want to be ill your whole life. I want you to live. Please, promise that you will live. Her eyes pleaded with me, and I nodded even though I didn't know if I could possibly make such a promise, because then I still did not know what living was for me, staying and drowning, or leaving and carrying the guilt forever. October came sooner than I anticipated, as if time itself were conspiring to drive me to a choice I still had no clue how to make, and each day seemed heavier than before. The realtor's signs were stacked in the garage, half-filled contracts covered the counter, and I was walking through the house at night, trailing my hand over the walls, memorizing it all as if I already grieved its loss. The indent in the hallway where I fell on my bike at 8, the notch in the doorframe where Dad measured my height every year, the peeling kitchen wallpaper Mom had promised to replace but never managed. It wasn't a home to me, it was a second skin, and the thought that it could belong to strangers made me sick. Simultaneously, my freelance career was imploding because I was unable to keep pace. I'd stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning trying to complete everything in a timely manner, yet my brain was fog. Clients didn't even return emails anymore. My savings account was dwindling to zero. At 23, I was supposed to be building momentum, but I felt like I was disintegrating in slow motion, caught between obligation and an uncertain future. Every conversation with Dad was an argument. He'd tell me, Lucas, you've got to dream big. You can't stay in this town all your life. And I'd retort, you mean I can't stay in this house all my life? He'd glare and I'd glare, and Mom would cry silently between us until the silence became worse than the shouting. I went into her room one night to check on her, and she was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Lucas, she whispered, her voice strained. I never wanted this to be so hard on you. I sat down at the edge of the bed, my throat tightening. Then why didn't you say anything? I asked, almost like a child begging for a response that would make everything okay. She turned her head, tears welling in her eyes. Because I feared you'd never forgive us. And in that moment, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a piece of candy to be handed out at will. It was messy, painful, and maybe it would never come, not whole. But I stooped down, kissed her forehead, and said to me, I'll always take care of you. She smiled faintly, and it killed me all over again because I knew she was counting on that promise to include me going with them to Florida, but I wasn't sure I could. The breaking point was 2 weeks before closing date. Dad and I argued again in the kitchen. I don't even remember how it started, but suddenly I was screaming, you got me to leave everything for this family, and now you're kicking me out like trash. His face turned red and he screamed back at me, we didn't ask you to give up anything. You decided. That embarrassed me more than anything. I decided? As if I'd been some arrogant fool who offered to put my life on hold, as if I hadn't volunteered because they needed me. I slammed my fists on the counter with enough force that the mugs shook, and I declared, you're right, I did choose, and maybe now I get to pick me. The room was silent after that, and for the first time in my life, I noticed something on Dad's face that was a little like regret, maybe even shame, but I didn't let him talk. I picked up my keys, stood up and left, drove until the gas light came on. I found myself at a roadside rest a full hour from where I was when I fled, huddled in the dark vehicle, trembling, sobbing, laughing hysterically at myself because I had no idea where I was headed. I only knew I could not breathe in that house a moment longer. Within the week, I decided. I searched for a Boston full-time job, one I'd been wishing for months but never thought I'd be able to keep with Mom. It was a gamble, but I got an interview. When I told Mom, tears welled up in her eyes, yet she smiled. That's marvelous, she exhaled, though her voice cracked. Dad simply nodded, stiff, as if he wanted to protest but couldn't quite come up with the words. I had a duffel bag packed with the essentials, clothes, my laptop, that notebook full of midnight late-night ideas. The night before I departed for the interview, I walked through every room in the house one final time. I bid farewell under my breath to the kitchen, to the porch swing, to the bedroom where I waited for a future that never came. And I stood before my parents' door, listening to the calm breathing, and said softly, "I'm sorry." Not because I ever thought leaving was wrong, but because it was so damn painful. The interview went well. I got the job. It wasn't glamorous, a junior design position at a company, but it was secure, and it was for me. Lastly, after all those years, I had something that belonged to me. My parents closed on the house 7 days later and departed for Florida. I did not accompany them. We hugged each other goodbye in the driveway, Mom clinging to me like she never wanted to let go of me, Dad patting me clumsily on the back, both of us pretending that this was not the end of something sacred. As their car receded from sight, I froze there until the taillights faded, and then the silence that followed was more than I could handle. I ached to have run after them, begged them to stay, but I didn't. I just stood there crying, sobs streaming down my face as I knew I'd never set foot inside that house again. And now, months later, I'm here in Boston, working obscenely long hours, building a life that's fragile but actual. I go see Mom every week, sometimes twice a week, and she tells me about the sun in Florida, the neighbors, the doctors. Dad and I don't exchange much, but when we do, in a flash, curtly, as if we're still dancing around all the words we never spoke. Every now and then, I dream about the house. I'm moving through its rooms, running my hand over the walls, breathing in the food Mom used to make, hearing Dad's laugh. And I wake up in my small flat, alone, and it feels like I've been punched in the gut. But I get on with it. Undefined. Because even if it hurts, I know that I couldn't have been trapped in that instant indefinitely. Undefined. Did I do the right thing? Undefined. I don't know. Undefined. Perhaps duty would have been to go with them, to give everything up a bit longer. Assistant. That's all I can say is that I'm here, doing my best, failing, but alive. And sometimes when the guilt creeps in late at night, I hear Mom's voice on the porch. "Please, promise me you'll live." So I'm trying, Mom. I'm trying.